Alright, how you guys doing today? Today I want to show you how to replace the CT15B on a Gen 5 3S GTE on an MR2 SW20 body. First off, you want to remove the panel and the side cover. X-brace out. The panel lifts up and out. And then remove the IC pipes. Remove the hot pipe. And the tool that I use is Milwaukee 3/8 electric wrench, 5/16 with a little swivel extension. Makes your life a lot easier. Next up, remove all the sensors so that we can clear it out, and then remove the engine mount. So here it is, 14 mil. There's a long 14 mil on the bottom, and then a 14 mil socket to remove it, and a 12 millimeter wrench to remove this one button for the bottom AC bracket. And then next step is unplug the O2 sensor. Move that out of the way. Next up, we're going to move the oil dipstick, which is the 12 millimeter socket with an extension. we're gonna remove the heat shield. And there's a 12mm socket. Remove it with the 12mm socket. Bolt in the back, the heat shield. Okay, next up is we're gonna move to the other side of the turbo and remove the coolant line and undo the intake. So with this side, I want to go ahead and get one of these hose clamps from Harbor Freight, 1/2 inch, to block the coolant line so it doesn't drip out. And you just tighten the two bottom hoses that goes to the turbo. So you're trying to minimize as much leak as possible without damaging the hose. And you have a bunch of coolant leaking out. You can buy it at the Harbor Freight, it's pretty cheap. It's like different sizes. Okay. So the clamp that I use a 10mm socket for the intake. Loosen it out and just leave it aside. And next up is we use a 10mm socket, 1/4 inch, with a little extension to get the two nut on the coolant line out. And you also, it's good to have like a little magnet to get the bottom mold out. And before doing that, this bracket right here is attached to the wastegate bracket from the turbo. So you want to undo that bolt. Oh, it's on there pretty tight. Extension. So I use like a 12mm socket with like 3-inch extension just to break it loose. Get like a 1-inch extension with a 12mm. Alright, so we got this little guy out and go ahead and remove the coolant line. So I'll start from the inside, from the bottom first. And then once it's loose, you get your magnet and just kind of sit on there so that when it drops, it connect it. Cool, there it is. And do the top line. And then go ahead and undo the coolant line. Just be careful, there's going to be a little bit of coolant coming out. So just prepare yourself and just throw like one of these bucket underneath so that it doesn't drip all over your floor. Okay, and then you just pull it out. And there will be coolant coming out. And get some kind of hook. And we'll just hook it to the car. Or a rope or something. Okay, so this side's pretty much done. We're gonna go ahead and loosen up 8 exhaust bolt, and as well as the downpipe. And this is pretty much in real time. I don't have time to edit the video or anything, so. And it's good to get one of these long straight wrench. I usually have like a 12, 14, and a 17. It's a very helpful tool. For the bottom bolt, use an extension with a 14mm deep socket. And then undo the 8 bolt for the exhaust manifold. 14mm deep socket. And with this one, I sleep about one nut back. Just leave one of them back. So that way later on when you open up the bottom line, the bottom, it doesn't come out when you try to wiggle it. Remove the oil line. Okay, so that's pretty much it. And next is we're gonna use a use a 19mm extension with a 10mm socket, 19mm socket. Right now, what we're gonna do is we're gonna there's an oil line right here. I don't know if you can see that or not, but I'll show you later. Essentially, use the 19mm bolt for the oil line, the oil feed line. Since I already replaced the motor on this one we're just gonna break it loose and just leave it, and then just let it like couple thread, so that way you don't have to completely remove the turbo. The washer and gaskets are brand new since the last time I did it, so the washer and gaskets will still be good. So I'm gonna leave the whole oil line in there. So right now I'm gonna break it loose. And if you want, if yours like the original, I would suggest replacing the washer and the oil line gaskets as well. But since this is fairly new and I want to upgrade this turbo to a billet, that's it. And don't completely remove it, in my case, because my washer is still brand new. Alright, looks good. Now let's go ahead and jack up the floor, jack up the car, and then we'll go underneath and undo all the bottom part of the turbo. Alright, next up what you want to do is remove the exhaust and then the bracket for it. So I'm running a Berg Gen 4, Gen 5 downpipe. bolt for the bracket is 14 millimeter. This little guy right here. And go ahead and loosen up this 12 millimeter bracket for the oil return line. Just loosen it. As far as the downpipe goes, this one, there's one more bolt on top of the downpipe underneath the turbo that I didn't get out earlier because it's really hard to get. So you can use it from the bottom of the car. Alright, got that little sucker out. You want to use a little 14 millimeter wrench. So the bolt that I was talking about earlier is this little guy, and it goes behind here. So that's why it's a little harder when you do it from the top or the bottom, whichever you want to feel like doing. But essentially, when you put it back, you want to put this one first, kind of snug it. Because the way that this downpipe is designed, once you put the downpipe bolt, the bottom bolt first, and you apply pressure on these other four, it's gonna create a seal. So that's how this downpipe is designed. So it's a little tricky to get this little bottom one out, but that's pretty much it. And then go ahead and remove this this CT15B downpipe out of the turbo bracket. Just gonna use this 14 millimeter deep socket. Here's one. What I like to do with these kind of cars, like when stuff that you know you're gonna remove later on, I tend to put some anti-seize on it, so that way it's a lot easier when you do the second time around. Like anything that's like exhaust related. This time around is a lot easier to remove out. Okay. And the next step's gonna be a little tricky. So that's that bracket right there that I was telling you about. So it goes like this. Turbo. So remove that and then The turbo should be free now after I remove the oil line from the top. This next part is a little tricky. What I normally do is I remove this 12mm deep socket to remove this nut out, and then I use one of these 8mm torque socket to remove the little stud out. So that way when you remove the turbo, this whole thing comes out. It makes my job a lot easier because I've done it so many times. And to me, that's the best way and that's the easiest way to put the turbo out and leaving all the lines intact. So the hardest part, the reason why I use one of the swivel, because of the bolt back here, it's at a weird angle. So you want to keep it straight as much as possible. Same thing when you're removing it. It goes right here and you just kind of remove the stud out. And when you put it back, make sure the stud is straight on and then go into the teeth. That's the way the Toyota designed it. And that's to me the easiest way to remove it. And also by undoing these bolts from the block, so that way it makes it a lot easier to wiggle, and you can basically adjust the turbo and to get this little stud and bolt in place. And there's also a metal gasket as well behind under the turbo. So let's get to it. Alright, and what I like to also use is long 3/8 extension. Just make my job a lot easier. So I'll go from the one from the back, the hardest spot first. One nut. And my 1/4" extension with a little 8mm torque socket to get the stud out. It's a little tricky to get it on. So this guy right here. Yep. And now the other bolt. I mean the other nut. The stud. Okay. All right, we're all set to remove the turbo. So basically what this does is makes it easier for us to remove it. Okay. All right, so pretty much you we remove all the bolts that's attached to the turbo, and remove this one last bolt that I left in earlier. Like a rag over the turbo, and then just go ahead and just pull it out. It's gonna be a little tight. Stick a little pry bar to pry bar out the manifold. That's it. And that's how you get the turbo out. So pretty much that's the reason why I take the stud out, because if you don't take it out, it's gonna be really pain in the butt to remove the turbo out. And then when you put it back in, you kind of line it up, put the stud back, and put the bolt, get the nut back on. But other than that, that's pretty much it. And what I like to do is just anti-seize all these stud right here, so that way if I have to remove it next time again, it'll make my job a lot easier, or make the job for the next guy a lot easier. So we'll go ahead and preload the turbo and then put the new turbo in. Alright, I went ahead and pretty much preload the whole wastegate already. So when you apply air, vacuum, okay. At 12, it's not to slowly open up. So at 15 pound, the wastegate is open. Right here. Alright, so it looks pretty good. The preload's good. And we'll go ahead and route this vacuum hose to the turbo, and then we're good to go. Alright, next what I like to do is personally is just basically pour some oil into the feed return line. See how the oil's coming out? So just kind of let it sit in there for a little bit, spin the turbine, just to basically have some oil circulate into the rings, into the O-rings of the seal of the turbo. And then whenever you're ready, the oil's going to come out, so just drain out. And then when you put it on the car, the turbo is going to leak out a little bit, which is fine. So essentially what you want to do is you want to dry crank it for like at least 30 seconds, so that way there's oil circulate in the turbo, so that way you don't crank it on the dry, and that may or may not, you know, cause the damage on the seal of it. But that's what I like to do on it, so that way I just want to make sure that there's oil inside the turbo before you start the car, you know, firing it up and stuff. So dry crank it about 30 seconds or so, let the oil pump do its magic and pump oil into the turbo. All right, once the turbo is all set up and ready to put it back in, go ahead and just put the turbo back in with the exhaust studs. good. Okay. And what I like to do sometimes, well, most of the time, is to put anti-seize on all the exhaust stud and anything exhaust related, so that way later on I can remove it a lot easier. Since these kind of cars, I tend to remove the turbo a lot, upgrading stuff, always play around with it. And I use one of these guys, kind of like copper, anti-seize. And then some on the downpipe stud. And for this one, just put about one nut in, because you still have to put the stud for the bottom oil line and then the nut in as well. So we'll go ahead and lift up the car and then go underneath. Alright, we'll go ahead and install these two stud back into the oil return and feed line on the turbo. With that, I need a special swivel, 1/4 inch for the stud. Went ahead and replaced the oil, replaced the gasket as well. So got a brand new oil return and feed line gasket. Put the gasket in first. So it goes this way. So this is for the feed and this is for the return. Okay. So for the outer one, the easier one, the one nearest to the firewall, I just use it straight. Alright, and then the one in the back, which is the harder one, use that swivel head. right. So there it is. Those two studs I was talking to you about. So the scribble head will go perfectly in it, and this outer one right here. So right now it's a lot easier to adjust whatever I need to do. So that's the best way, in my opinion, to put the oil return line back in. So, and then just tighten everything up, get the car back down, tighten up all the stud, the downpipe. So you want to start from the downpipe, all the exhaust nut, and then put the bracket on the turbo, and then tighten up the oil lines, and then we're all set, and then put the downpipe back on. All right, the next step, what I like to do is put the coolant line back in. Since the turbo is easy to move, you can easily put the coolant line back in. First, replace the gasket. Get a brand new one from Toyota. The waterline gasket. Alright. A little bit of coolant will leak out, so put the two nut back on. The nut for the bracket. The bottom nut. Just use one of these. Hand tighten it. Okay, so tighten it by hand. Those kind of stuff I kind of feel torque it, because sometimes when I go by the spec on the BGB, it tends to over torque it, especially on the exhaust stud, especially on the one in the corner right here. I follow the torque spec on it, and it kind of rip off the aluminum on the head. So on these one, I just kind of hand feel the torque. And what I like to do is take the car for a spin, let the engine warm up the gasket, warm up everything, and then kind of like re-torque it again while it's hot. Just kind of like feel. And then put all the nut back on. The one stud by the water neck over here, this side is the most dangerous one because it has very, very little aluminum on the head. I kind of want to crisscross them as well. Oh, our battery. Milwaukee 3.8 ratchet battery. Amazing. I love this thing. And torque it with the right hand. Okay. Yeah, this one's the most fragile, the most cautious. I'm always scared of this one. If you're going, and then you feel like the nut's about to strip, that's when you stop. Sometimes when you follow the BGB torque spec, it'll just keep torquing until it rips the whole stud out. Got one. And just want to go one big circle, check everything again. Okay. Alright, that looks good. So we went ahead and tightened up all the bolt on the head. And then we'll go underneath, install the bracket, and then tighten up the oil lines, and then the downpipe. Alright, let's go ahead and put the bracket for the turbo to the block. Tighten up the two oil return and feed line bolt with the 12mm socket, and then install the downpipe with this nut first, the one the hardest spot to get to, and then tying up the feed bolt with a 19mm socket when it's in top, and then just tying up these two nut for the oil line. Alright, here's the bracket. And I'm going to use these copper anti-seize on all the nuts and bolts for the bracket. So that way next time it's easier to remove and it's not stuck to the block. And what you want to do first is tighten up the two bolt that goes into the block, and then the nut is the very last piece. Top nut, I use a long extension. It's a 14mm socket. Tight, and then we'll go ahead and do the oil line. Okay, and then the one in the corner, I used 12mm with the swivel head, like that. Okay. Alright, the two nut is in, nut for the turbo bracket, and then these two guys. We'll go ahead and slide the downpipe up there along with its gasket. Downpipe gasket. Alright, slide in place. And then reinstall the Burke downpipe. the next step is we have to get this nut in here. So, and this is a special nut where it's like it's rated for really high heat and it doesn't break loose or anything. So what you want to do is scoot the downpipe back out, put the nut in, and then go by hand. So keep the camera focused in here. All right, and we got to use one of these small little wrench to just kind of like hand tighten it in. That one, it does have to be really tight on that one nut. Just hand tight that one in, and then when you screw all the other one, it's gonna force this nut to be tighter. And that's what I noticed, because sometimes when you over torque this thing, that one nut, it's gonna be a pain in the butt to take it out. And go ahead and install the downpipe bracket. Your downpipe bracket, and then install the exhaust. And then that's pretty much it on the bottom of the car. All right, I went ahead and tighten everything in already. Bracket, all the nuts are in, screws are in, downpipe. So what I did was I went ahead and anti-seized all these nuts right here. Bolt the B pipe onto the downpipe, and then this bracket, that 14mm socket nut, that's the last piece of the bracket. So you want to get everything tight, then the bracket is the last piece to tighten up, so that way that will hold everything in place. And we're gonna tighten up that oil return line, feed line from the top. It's a lot easier. But other than that, bottom here, we're good to go. And then let's lower the car and finish it up. All right, we'll go ahead and the top part. Go ahead and finish up the downpipe. On the bolt for it. There's one on the bottom and 4 on top, and then 1 in the corner, so 6 nut total. And turn off that 19mm for the feed line. And then undo the coolant clamps. And then put back your intake. And then go ahead and put the intercooler on, and then let it run, warm up, take the intercooler off, and then check all the exhaust nut. Make sure that it's not loose at all, because I want to tighten it when the manifold is hot or when it's warm. And then you put the heat shield on, and then it looks like it's pretty much ready to go. Alright, it's pretty much all set. Make sure you double check everything. Coupler for the intake, the bracket for the wastegate, and then the bracket nut for the water line, the 210mm for the water line, all the exhaust stud, all the couplers are back in, everything's tight. Just kind of double check your work, so that way nothing comes loose or unexpected. What you want to do is you want to dry crank the engine as well. Dry crank it, so that way you basically start trying to crank the engine, let the oil pump do its magic, push all the oil into the turbo before you start the car. So that way you don't want to start it on basically on a dry seal. So you want to flood the oil pump. I mean the turbo line, the oil turbo line. So that way there's oil in the turbo itself, and then you can crank it first crank. So that way it's nice and lubricated. So that way you don't prevent any kind of leak, any future turbo seal leakage failure. So that's pretty much it, and that's how I pretty much swap out the CT15B on the Gen 4 and Gen 5. The Gen 2 and Gen 3s, they're pretty similar, but it's a little tight space, similar concept. It's the turbo's a lot bigger. So it's pretty similar to it. So I hope this helped. Go ahead and subscribe to my channel, and I'll make more videos.